There is a god you were taught to picture standing on a cliff in white marble robes, hair wild with ocean spray, trident raised toward a picturesque Aegean sunset. That image is a lie. Not a simplification, not a poetic shorthand. A lie, constructed deliberately over centuries to make something monstrous feel manageable. The oldest written records of this god, scratched in clay by palace scribes around 3,300 years ago, describe something that kept an entire civilization on its knees, not out of reverence, but out of raw, undiluted biological fear. The ancient Greeks did not love this deity. They were terrified of him, the way a person is terrified of the crack forming in the ceiling directly above their bed. And the reason they were terrified tells us something about ourselves that we have never fully stopped being afraid to say out loud. His name, pressed in linear B clay tablets recovered from the ruins of Pylos, reads as Poseidon. And in those same tablets, found among thousands of administrative records about grain allotments and bronze rations, his name appears more frequently than the name of Zeus. In the world before the classical gods were neatly arranged into a hierarchy, there was a different king, and his domain was not the sea. It was everything underneath you. The palace administrators of Mycenae understood something that later generations tried very hard to forget: that the ground you stand on is not solid. It never was. The entire Aegean basin sits atop the Hellenic Arc, one of the most seismically violent subduction zones on the surface of the planet, where the African tectonic plate grinds with slow, catastrophic patience beneath the Aegean microplate. The people who built the great Bronze Age palaces at Pylos, Knossos, and Thebes did not live in a landscape. They lived on a threshold, the thin, brittle membrane stretched over a crushing void that could rupture at any moment, without warning, without cause, without any possibility of appeal. And they knew it. The clay tablets prove it. Pylos tablet, PYTN 316, is the most disturbing bureaucratic document produced by any Bronze Age civilization. Scholars have debated it for decades, circling carefully around what it appears to describe: an emergency mobilization of offerings to the sanctuary of Poseidon during a period of extreme palatial crisis. Gold vessels, specially designated human bearers listed alongside the gold. The scribes were not composing a hymn. They were executing a transaction of the most desperate possible kind, logging the details of frantic appeasement the way a ship's captain logs the weight of cargo thrown overboard to stay afloat. The palace at Pylos was subsequently destroyed. It never recovered. The title the Mycenaean texts assign to Poseidon is Wanax, meaning absolute sovereign, the king. But in this archaic context, the word carries a shadow that later classical usage stripped away. The Wanax, with chthonic implications, meant something specific: the master of what lies beneath the soil. Not the sea, not the horizon, not the broad and navigable waters. The underworld. The pressurized darkness below the foundation stones of every palace, every temple, every granary, every house where a family slept, believing that tomorrow would resemble today. His epithets are a clinical taxonomy of a single threat delivered from multiple angles. Enosigaios, the earth shaker. Gaiochos, the earth holder, which implies not a gentle holding, but a suffocating grip, the way a predator pins its prey. Seisikthon, the earth quaker, a term that in ancient Greek carries the same felt sense as the word itself, a vibration in the bone. And then his actual name, Poseidon, from roots meaning Lord of the Earth, or, in some reconstruction, husband of the earth. A relationship of absolute physical dominance over a passive body that cannot refuse him. Each of these epithets points to the same underlying terror. The threat is not in front of you. It is not over the horizon on a stormy sea. It is beneath your feet. It has always been beneath your feet. And a man who first feels the low sub-bass vibration traveling through the stone floor of his palace, that resonance that arrives seconds before the walls begin to crack, knows exactly whose footsteps those are. The geographical record confirms what the mythology encodes. Helike, a major pan-Hellenic sanctuary of Poseidon, sat on the southwest shore of the Gulf of Corinth, directly above one of the most active fault systems in the ancient world. In 373 BC, on a single night, the earth fractured and the sea responded. The entire city, tens of thousands of people, sanctuaries and streets, and the archives of generations dropped below the surface of a lagoon. By morning, there was no city. There were only the mast tops of sunken ships visible through still water, and a silence where a metropolis had been, and somewhere beneath that water, the sacred enclosure of the god who had just devoured his own worshippers. Potidaea in Macedonia, 479 BC. A magnitude 7 earthquake followed immediately by a massive tsunami. The wave arrived during a Persian military incursion, and the retreating water had drawn a significant portion of the invading army out onto the exposed seafloor. The wave returned and drowned them. The Greeks, survivors watching from the walls, understood precisely whose intervention had killed the Persians. The god had not protected them out of loyalty. He had simply done what he always does. He moved. And the humans who happened to be in his path died. This is the detail that later mythological sanitizing could never quite erase. Poseidon's violence is not personal. It does not require a target. The earthquake does not choose which walls to collapse. The tsunami does not distinguish the Persian soldier from the Greek child standing on the same beach. The Mycenaean understanding of this deity encodes a fundamental, primal truth about natural catastrophe that the classical period spent centuries trying to domesticate into narrative. You cannot negotiate with a tectonic plate. You cannot appeal to its sense of justice or invoke its compassion. You can only offer gold into the breach and pray that the ground holds one more night. And this is what the Mycenaean palace administrators understood perfectly, kneeling over their clay tablets in the firelit corridors of Pylos, pressing their styluses with urgent hands into wet clay while the walls around them held. For now, the scribes were not recording mythology. They were filing disaster management paperwork for a civilization balanced on the edge of something vast and indifferent, and almost entirely invisible. There is a single detail embedded in the Linear B record that almost no one discusses. The clay tablets that preserve the name of Poseidon most frequently were baked not in a kiln. They were baked by the fire that destroyed the palace itself. The administrative records of his worship were preserved only because the building burned down. We know his name because his house collapsed. Think about that for a moment. Because the story of what Poseidon did with that kind of power, when he directed it not at cities, but at individual human beings, when the Earthshaker turned his attention to the biological world and decided to create rather than destroy, that story is far darker than any earthquake. What lives in the depths of his ocean is not his punishment. It is his progeny, and it is waiting. Most predators kill to eat. The ones that terrify us most, the ones that have threaded themselves into nightmare and folklore and the deepest registers of the human nervous system, are the ones that kill for a different reason. Curiosity, dominance, the expression of a nature that does not require justification because it recognizes no law that would ask it to provide one. Poseidon does not simply destroy, he creates. And what he creates is the most disturbing evidence of what he actually is. Understand first what the ancient ocean meant to the archaic Greek mind. It was not a resource. It was not a fishing lane or a fishing ground or a romantic abstraction. It was a hostile, lightless void that operated on entirely different biological rules than the terrestrial world. A pressurized darkness where the normal categories of predator and prey, living and dead, natural and aberrant, had no meaning. The creatures that rose from that darkness into the mythological record were not metaphors. They were psychological reports transmitted across centuries of what humans actually believed was down there, watching from the cold, waiting for the light to go out. Poseidon rules this darkness absolutely, and his ruling principle is not governance, it is contamination. When King Laomedon of Troy refused to pay for the construction of the city walls that Poseidon himself had built, the god did not impose a fine. He did not file a divine grievance with the Olympian court. He opened the ocean floor and sent a Ketos into the coastal waters, a massive, armored biological weapon generated from the pressurized depths, tasked with systematically consuming the population of the shoreline. The word Ketos in ancient Greek does not mean sea serpent. It does not mean monster in the vague, poetic sense. It means a specific category of creature, vast, aquatic, belonging to an order of biology that has no name in the terrestrial world. Poseidon did not invent this creature for the occasion. He already had it. He had been keeping it. The taxonomy of his direct offspring reveals a consistent, chilling pattern. He does not father scholars, architects, or legislators. He does not sire philosophers or healers. His genetics express themselves as singular, catastrophic departures from the biological norm. Creatures that do not belong in the world of daylight and human law, and that make their alien status physically visible in the most disturbing possible ways. Polyphemus. His mother is Thusa, a sea nymph, herself the daughter of Phorcys, the god of the hidden dangers of the deep. The Cyclops is not simply large, he is a body built for solitary predation. The single eye a biological statement of absolute spatial dominance, depth perception maximized in one direction only because the creature has never needed to watch its flanks. He lives in a cave sealed by a boulder no group of men can move. He eats his guests. And the detail that Homer makes viscerally specific, the one that has never been softened in any retelling, is this. He eats them the way you eat olives, casually, in pairs, in the dark, without ceremony, while the others listen to the bones. His disregard for Xenia, the sacred law of hospitality that held the ancient world together, is not ignorance. The Cyclops knows the custom. He rejects it because his father's blood recognizes no human law as binding. Pegasus and Chrysaor. Their origin is the most disturbing birth narrative in the entire mythological canon. Medusa, a mortal woman, is violated by Poseidon and subsequently mutilated by Athena, transformed into a gorgon as punishment for being the victim of the assault. When Perseus eventually decapitates her, the winged horse and the golden-armed giant do not emerge from a wound. They erupt from the stump of the severed neck, hemorrhaging out of dead flesh, born not from a womb, but from a catastrophic injury inflicted by someone else's blade. This is reproduction weaponized. This is biology expressing itself as trauma, as aftermath, as the thing that climbs out of a disaster and keeps moving. The children are viable. They function. They even possess a terrible beauty. But their origin is a severed neck and a man running from the Gorgons with a head in a bag. The Minotaur. Here Poseidon does not produce a child directly. He engineers one by proxy, which is in some ways more disturbing than direct descent. King Minos of Crete prays for a sign of divine favor. Poseidon sends a perfect white bull from the sea, sacred and intended for sacrifice. Minos keeps the bull. In response, Poseidon infects the queen, Pasiphae with an unnatural biological compulsion, a targeted neurological alteration delivered from a distance, requiring no physical contact. The minotaur that results is locked in a labyrinth and fed the youth of Athens in annual installments. It is a territorial tax, collected in children's lives, administered on behalf of a god who has never set foot in Crete, and never needed to. Antaeus, son of Poseidon and the earth herself, a giant who draws infinite strength from physical contact with the ground, who ambushes travelers in North Africa, murders them systematically, and builds a temple to his father, using the skulls of the dead as construction material, not as trophies, as building materials. He is a serial killer operating a charnel house in his father's honor, and the theological implication is clear. This is the appropriate way to worship the Earthshaker. In skulls, in bones, in the architectural language of accumulated death. What connects these four beings is not power, it is dislocation. Each of them is a creature who does not belong where they are, who breaches the boundary between the acceptable and the abhorrent, and refuses to cross back. Polyphemus violates the law of hospitality in a cave lit by the smell of curdling cheese and roasting flesh. Pegasus exists in mid-air, beautiful and impossible, born from the most grotesque natal violence imaginable. The Minotaur haunts a maze beneath a palace, eating in the dark, waiting for the door to open. Antaeus sits in the desert, building temples from the skulls of strangers, drawing strength from the same earth that Poseidon ruptures from below. There is a psychological mechanism embedded in this pattern that the ancients did not articulate, but clearly felt. When Poseidon creates life, he demonstrates that the boundary between biology and catastrophe is thinner than we want to believe. The sea does not produce balanced ecosystems in the archaic imagination. It produces pressure. It produces weight. It produces things adapted to survival in conditions that would kill you instantly. Things whose biology is the physical record of what it takes to exist in a domain where no human has ever survived. When those things surface, when the Ketos breaks the waterline and the Cyclops opens his cave and the winged horse punches through the neck of a dead woman, the message encoded in each eruption is the same one the tectonic plates deliver from below. The world you believe you live in is a surface. What lives under the surface is ancient and enormous, and does not share your values. And the most disturbing part of Poseidon's genetic legacy is not what he created. It is what he created it with. He did not engineer these creatures in isolation. He required women for the process, women who had no choice about the transaction, whose bodies became the laboratory, whose trauma became the incubator. That is the thread that connects the Minotaur to the Cyclops, to the winged horse, to the skull temple in the desert. And it leads directly to the darkest part of what Poseidon actually is. What he did to Medusa was not an isolated incident. It was a pattern. And the next woman he targeted was grieving and desperate. And he found her anyway. There is a specific kind of predator that does not hunt in the open. It does not select the strongest target or the most visible one. It identifies the context in which its target feels safest. A protected space, a sacred space, a space defined by the promise of boundaries that cannot be crossed. And it crosses them. Not by accident, not despite the boundary. Because of it. The violation of sanctuary is the point. The mythological record of Poseidon's interactions with women is not a series of unrelated incidents. It is a pattern with a consistent internal logic. Locate vulnerability, identify the space that was designed to make that vulnerability safe, and enter it anyway. We know the Medusa story. Most people believe they know it as a story about a monster. They are wrong about what the monster is. In Ovid's account of the assault, Medusa is described before her transformation as a mortal priestess of Minerva, the Roman Athena, notable for the beauty of her hair. She serves in the goddess's temple. This is critical context. A temple of Athena in the ancient world is not simply a building. It is the geographical center of a specific set of guarantees. That within these walls, the domain of wisdom and law and protected space holds. That what exists inside the boundary of Athena's sanctum is, by definition, outside the reach of the forces she opposes. Athena is civilization. Her temple is the argument, made in stone and ritual, that civilization works. Poseidon walks in. He does not pursue Medusa on the road. He does not wait for her outside the precinct walls. He stalks her into the innermost sanctum of the goddess of wisdom and law and violates her on the cold marble floor of the most protected space in the city. This is not incidental. The selection of the location is the message. Civilization, its wisdom, its laws, its rituals, its architectural declarations of safe harbor, offers no protection from the earth-shaker. The walls of Athena's temple are, to Poseidon, the walls of Helike before the fault gave way. They simply have not fallen yet. What follows is the institutional response that every survivor of predatory violence inside protected spaces recognizes. The god who committed the assault is too powerful to punish, too embedded in the existing structure, too essential to the balance of power to make an example of. Athena, who is the goddess of strategic warfare, remember, who calculates consequences before acting, directs her wrath at the only available target, the woman who survived. The snakes that replace Medusa's hair are not simply a grotesque punishment. They are the physical inscription of Poseidon's act onto her body, permanently readable by everyone who sees her, announcing to the world that the Earthshaker was here and left his mark. The petrifying gaze is the ultimate isolation mechanism. She cannot look at another living person without destroying them, and they cannot look at her without dying. She is quarantined inside her own trauma, exiled to an island at the edge of the world, and every hero who subsequently comes to kill her is celebrated for doing so, while the architect of her condition continues to circulate freely among the Olympians, attending divine councils, receiving worship, accepting his tithing of gold. The story of Medusa is not a story about a monster. It is a forensic account of how institutions handle the intersection of overwhelming power and the women who survive its application. But Medusa is not the most devastating example of what Poseidon is willing to do, or who he is willing to do it to. The 2nd-century geographer Pausanias preserved a myth that the classical tradition largely declined to foreground, perhaps because it is too unambiguous to be given a comfortable reading. Demeter, at the period in question, is not simply a goddess. She is a mother in the active grip of the worst possible loss. Her daughter Persephone has just been taken to the underworld by Hades, and Demeter is wandering the surface of the earth in a state of total psychological dissolution, tearing up the agricultural cycles of the entire world in her grief, her attention consumed entirely by finding her child. She is not simply vulnerable. She is distracted with the kind of grief that makes the body forget itself. She is a mother who has lost a daughter. Poseidon finds her in this condition and pursues her. Demeter attempts to hide. Using her divine power, she transforms herself into a mare and conceals herself in the herds of an Arcadian king, hoping the disguise will make her invisible within the mass of animals. This is not the response of a goddess who believes her divine status protects her. This is flight. The biological equivalent of the thing a creature does when it hears the predator moving through the brush and knows that the predator is larger than itself. Poseidon follows her into the herd. He transforms himself into a stallion, and the thing that the sources record with studied neutrality is that there was no moment at which Demeter's attempted escape was acknowledged as a deterrent. The psychological fallout was total. Demeter emerged from this not as the goddess of the harvest, but as the goddess of fury, taking on the epithets Erinis, the fury, and Melena, which means simply black. She withdrew from the surface of the world entirely, sealing herself into a lightless cave in Phigalia, dressed in black robes, dragging the fertility of the entire earth into the cave with her. Crops failed. Animals stopped reproducing. The world went silent with famine. The Phigalians, the people who lived near her cave and worshipped this traumatized iteration of the goddess, built her a cult statue. The description Pausanias provides of this idol is one of the strangest and most psychologically precise objects in the ancient world. It bore the body of a woman seated on a rock, clothed to the feet, but the head was the head of a horse. From the equine skull grew serpents and wild beasts. In her hands she held a dolphin and a dove. Consider the dolphin. The dolphin is, across the ancient Greek world, the sacred animal of Poseidon, his symbol, his emblem, the creature that represents his presence in the water. The Phigalian goddess, the Black Demeter, the Earth Mother who retreated into a cave while the world starved above her, is depicted for eternity, holding in her hands the symbol of the being who violated her. Unable to put it down, unable to look away from it, compelled to hold it forever in the iconography of her grief. From this union she bore 2 children. The first was Arion, a black, immortal horse of impossible speed, who later carries the hero Adrastos safely off a battlefield while everyone else dies. The second was a daughter whose name the Arcadian mystery cults considered too sacred, too volatile, to speak aloud. She is known only as Despoine, the Mistress, an entire goddess born of a violent act, whose true name the worshippers who gathered around her mother's cave in the dark never said out loud. The unspoken name, the god who goes unpunished, the idol forced to hold the emblem of her abuser for eternity. These are the structures that the myth of Poseidon is made of, not the trident and the horses and the broad blue sea. This, the cold marble floor of a violated sanctuary, the herd of horses in Arcadia where a mother tried to disappear and could not, the cave in Phigalia where the world's food supply was held hostage while the goddess sat in the dark and did not speak. And Poseidon, meanwhile, returned to the sea. He had one more use for his power. He had a king to dismantle, methodically, over the course of a decade. Not to kill. That would have been too quick, too merciful, too finished. The Earthshaker does not kill cleanly. He holds on. Here is what everyone knows. Odysseus blinded the Cyclops prayed to his father, and the father made the journey home very difficult. 10 years, storms, monsters, lost ships, divine punishment for an act of violence against a god's son. Here is what that version of the story is designed to conceal. Poseidon did not make the journey home difficult. He designed a decade-long psychological vivisection so precise in its execution that it reads less like divine retribution and more like an experiment. The question being tested was not whether Odysseus deserved to suffer. The question was, how much can a human mind absorb before it breaks completely? And what, precisely, does the moment of breaking look like? Go back to the cave. Odysseus and his surviving men are trapped behind a boulder no number of human bodies can shift, in a space that smells of old wool and curdled milk, and the particular copper and mineral smell of blood soaking into stone floor. Polyphemus eats 2 men on the first night. He eats 2 more in the morning. He is not hungry in any ordinary biological sense. He is eating with the casual, methodical rhythm of something that has never needed to consider consequences, because it has never encountered anything capable of creating them. Odysseus devises the escape. He is, of all the Homeric heroes, the one who wins through intelligence rather than strength. The one whose defining attribute is the ability to remain strategically invisible. To be nobody. Autus. The man whose name holds no target for the divine apparatus to lock onto. He uses this gift perfectly inside the cave. He blinds the giant with a sharpened wooden stake heated in the fire. He straps his men to the undersides of the sheep so they pass out of the cave undetected when Polyphemus rolls back the stone at dawn. It is, by any measure, a masterpiece of tactical improvisation under conditions of extreme duress. And then, when they are on the ships, when they are moving, when the distance between themselves and the cave has opened to something that feels like safety, Odysseus does the one thing his entire nature was designed to prevent him from doing. He speaks. He shouts his real name back across the water. His lineage, his city, his identity, stripped of every defensive obscurity he had constructed for himself in that cave, hurled at the blind, roaring giant as a declaration of personal authorship. He needs Polyphemus to know who beat him. The Cyclops prays to his father, and Poseidon accepts the specific terms of the curse. Not death, but degradation. Not the quick annihilation of drowning, but the slow, methodical dismantling of everything Odysseus is. He prays that if Odysseus must return home, he arrives late and broken, in a stranger's ship, having buried every single man who left Troy with him. Poseidon honors this contract with the dedication of a craftsman. Understand the physics of the situation. Poseidon is the absolute sovereign of every body of water on Earth. He commands currents, winds, atmospheric pressure, wave height, tidal forces, and the biological contents of the ocean to a depth that exceeds human measurement. He could, at any point during the next 10 years, end Odysseus in under 60 seconds. A wave 10 meters high, arriving without warning, takes a wooden ship apart in seconds. Drowning in cold water for a man without flotation equipment takes 4 minutes. He could have done this in the first week. He does not. Instead, he subjects Odysseus to what can only be described as a curriculum of loss. He sends the fleet into environments designed not to kill immediately, but to reduce, to erode crew numbers, to burn ships, to shatter the authority of a commander who cannot protect the people under his command. The Laestrygonians, giant cannibals who crush 11 of 12 ships with boulders thrown from the cliffs, leaving Odysseus watching from his single surviving vessel as his fleet disappears in a cloud of splinters and screaming. Scylla, who takes 6 men, exactly 6, 1 per head, while the ship passes through the straits, reaching down with 6 necks into the rowing benches and lifting the sailors out of their seats while they cry out for Odysseus by name, their hands reaching toward him as they go up. He cannot stop it. He can only watch and steer and survive. This is the methodology, not death. The front row seat to other people's deaths, repeated across a decade, with the commander's helplessness made maximally visible each time. By the time Poseidon is done with him, Odysseus is alone on a beach on an island at the edge of the world, crying. Not strategizing, not planning. Just sitting on the shore of Ogygia, staring at the water that will not let him pass, weeping with the hollow, airless quality of a person who has forgotten what it felt like to believe that things would improve. 7 years. Every morning the same beach, the same water, the same impossible horizon. The king who refused to be nobody is sitting in the dark, having lost every single person who ever called him by his real name. Poseidon allows him to leave eventually, not out of mercy, But because Athena has intervened with Zeus, and the political calculation of the Olympian court has shifted, and the god of the sea makes decisions based on power, not sentiment. The lifting of the persecution is not forgiveness. It is the predator moving on because the prey is no longer interesting. But the story of Poseidon does not end with Odysseus. The most profound statement he ever makes is not the 10-year destruction of a single man. It is a single afternoon on a hill above Athens, when a city asked him to be its patron god, and he showed them exactly who he was, and they voted no. The Acropolis. The newly forming city of Cecrops considers which deity will anchor its future. Poseidon arrives first. He does not negotiate, does not present terms, does not ask what the city needs. He raises his trident and drives it into the bedrock of the hill with the full force of his seismic authority. The sound of that impact, the concussive crack of bronze on stone, the deep vibratory shudder traveling through the bedrock, the subsonic resonance moving through the soil of the entire hill, is the sound of the earthshaker asserting ownership. Water erupts from the fractured stone. A spring right on the Acropolis. It is Saltwater. He has struck the earth with the same geological violence that swallowed Helike, that drowned Polyphemus's coastline, that fractured the foundations of Knossos across 4 separate destruction phases. And what has come out of the earth is the one thing that cannot nourish a city. You cannot drink salt water. You cannot irrigate with it. You cannot grow crops in it. Salting the earth is an ancient military punishment inflicted by conquerors on cities they want to ensure can never recover. Poseidon has walked onto the Acropolis and, with his single, thunderous act of territorial domination, produced a perfect symbol of what his patronage would cost, the land poisoned with the signature of the sea. Athena plants an olive tree. The olive tree does not announce itself. It does not crack the bedrock or shake the hill or produce a concussive impact that reverberates through the stone. It simply grows, silently, in the patient way that olive trees have always grown. Slowly, with enormous longevity, their roots working down through the thin rocky soil of Attica, their small silver-gray leaves orienting precisely toward sunlight, their fruit accumulating across seasons into the oil that fuels lamps and preserves food and trades across the Aegean in terracotta amphorae from here to the coast of Phoenicia. The citizens of Athens voted for the olive tree. Poseidon responded by flooding the Thriasian plain under a wall of seawater that turned the surrounding land to a saltwater marsh. His tantrum, his punishment for being chosen against, drowned the lowlands of Attica in the ocean he controls absolutely. The saltwater spring remained on the Acropolis, sealed within the Erechtheion, permanently displayed as a monument to the moment the city almost chose something else. This is the deepest irony embedded in the entire mythological life of Poseidon. He is the deity of sovereignty, the lord of the earth, the Mycenaean king who outranked Zeus in the oldest records of Greek worship. He controls more physical territory than any other Olympian. Every ocean, every river, every subterranean aquifer, the entire tectonic system of the Aegean world. He is, by any objective measurement, the most powerful force in the ancient cosmological system. He lost to an olive tree, not to superior force, not to divine cunning, not to a weapon, or a prophecy, or a political coalition on Olympus. The citizens of a growing city looked at the raw, colossal, irreversible power of the Earthshaker and said, "That is not what we want to become." They chose cultivation. They chose economy. They chose the thing that grows quietly in poor soil and lives for 1,000 years, producing oil that lights the dark, over the thing that shatters stone and gushes forth poison. The saltwater spring stayed. Poseidon's mark on the Acropolis, the reminder that he was there, that he could come back. that the bedrock of the hill is exactly as fragile as the bedrock of every city that ever sat above a fault line, remained visible in the Erechtheion for as long as the building stood, right next to the olive tree. The city built its entire civilization in the shadow of the spring that could not sustain it. And here is the thing that the ancient myths understood, and that we have spent 2,500 years carefully choosing not to say directly. We still do this. We build cities on fault lines. We build ports in the paths of tsunamis. We build petrochemical infrastructure along coastlines that the geological record tells us will flood. We vote for the olive tree every morning when we turn on the lights and open the supply chains and run the algorithms that keep the fragile, extraordinary membrane of modern civilization pressurized against the void beneath it. The tectonic plates of the Hellenic arc are still grinding against each other in the dark, at the same depth, with the same force, at the same pace they maintained in 373 BC, when Helike vanished in a single night. The only thing that has changed is that we have built larger cities on top of the fault. We have more to lose. We have convinced ourselves, the way the Athenians convinced themselves after they voted for the olive tree, that the choice we made in the voting was permanent, that we have settled the question, that the spring on the hill is picturesque and historical and no longer capable of what it once implied. Poseidon does not accept the result of the vote. He never did. He salted the plains, and he is salting them still, in slow geological time, in the pressure building along every subduction zone on Earth, in the retreating tide that means the water is gathering itself for something, in the low, sub-bass resonance that a person walking across a certain kind of stone floor might feel in the soles of their feet, the sensation of vibration where there should be solid ground. He is not a myth. He is the reason the myth was necessary. And the myths we tell about managing him, our seawalls, our early warning systems, our building codes, our insurance instruments, our confident engineering, are the same myths the Mycenaean palace scribes were telling when they pressed the stylus into clay to record the gold being sent to his sanctuary. The difference is that the scribes knew, when they pressed the stylus, that the gold was not enough. The Phigalians built a cave shrine to a goddess holding the dolphin she could not put down. The Athenians built their greatest temple a few meters from a saltwater spring. The Mycenaeans fired their most desperate administrative records in the furnace of their own palace burning down. We build our fiber optic cables across the floor of the same ocean that swallowed Helike, and we call it infrastructure. And we have to believe it will hold, because the alternative is to sit on the beach at Ogygia, staring at the water, knowing that something enormous is watching from below, and choosing not to finish you yet. Knowing that the restraint is not kindness, knowing that the predator prefers you surviving long enough to see what comes next. The true horror of Poseidon was never the earthquake. It was the patience, the willingness to hold the earth in place year after year, decade after decade, letting the cities stack higher and the coastlines grow more crowded, and the belief in the stability of the ground spread deeper into the culture, until the moment when he decides that the experiment has run long enough, and the tectonic plates resume their grinding, and the wave gathers at the horizon, black and enormous, eclipsing the light. We paved our roads over his temples. We built our power grids above his fault lines. We named our natural disasters after atmospheric science and geological mechanics, and stripped them of every association with divinity. And in doing so, we made them impossible to negotiate with. You could at least bring gold to the sanctuary. You could press the stylus into clay and record the offering and believe, for one more night, that the ground would hold. Now we have only the seismograph, and what it reads, in the lightless depths of the Hellenic arc, is not silence. The saltwater spring on the Acropolis is still there. In what remains of the Erechtheion, beneath the foundations of Athena's most sacred precinct, the crack that Poseidon drove into the bedrock with his trident is still visible in the stone, not as a wound that healed, as a mark that was never allowed to close. The city built its golden age around a permanent reminder that it was always one geological decision away from becoming Helike. The figure who vanished at the end of this story is not Odysseus. He made it home, eventually, alone, in a stranger's ship, broken in the precise configuration Polyphemus specified. The figure who vanished is the daughter of Demeter and Poseidon, born in a cave in Arcadia, whose name the mystery cult initiates carried to their graves without speaking. Despoine, the Mistress. A goddess whose existence was generated by the most violent moment in the mythology of the natural world, who grew up worshipped in the same cave her mother used as a refuge from the world that had made her a victim. What Despoine knew, what the initiates who sat in the firelight of that cave in Phigalia and refused to say her name out loud were circling around, we have never been told. The mystery cults kept their mysteries. The true name was never recorded. The goddess born of a geological catastrophe enacted upon a grieving mother remained, in the deepest sense, unspoken. Perhaps because some things, when named, become impossible to unname. And the Arcadians, who lived directly above the fault lines, who watched Helike go under, who pressed their hands to the stone floors of their temples and felt the vibration in their palms, understood that certain knowledge is best carried in the dark, in silence, in the encrypted form of a ritual whose content you do not speak, because speaking it would require acknowledging that it is true. The Earthshaker is patient. He is always patient. And the thing he is most patient about is the moment we forget to be afraid of him. Here is what the myth of Poseidon actually is, stripped of every marble column and every Hollywood ocean and every sanitized classroom summary. It is the theological encoding of a single, irreducible fact about the physical world. The ground is not solid. It never was. The foundation of every city, every institution, every family, every self we have constructed is resting on something that can move, without warning, and without appeal, and without the slightest interest in what was built on top of it. And the question the myth refuses to answer, the one it hands back to you at the end of every version of every story, is the same question the Athenians faced on the Acropolis, with the trident still vibrating in the stone and the salt water pooling around their feet. The question is not whether the olive tree was a better choice than the spring. Of course it was. Of course civilization is better than catastrophe. Of course cultivation is better than poison. The question is, if you knew, if you truly understood, in your body and not just your mind, that the spring was still there, that the tectonic plates were still grinding, that the water was gathering at the horizon right now at this moment while you read this, would you still build the city? Or would you look at what Odysseus looked like after 10 years alone with the ocean, and at what Demeter looked like holding the dolphin she could not put down, and at what Medusa looked like in the cold of a violated temple, and decide that some coasts are better left unwalled, some ground better left unbuilt, some names better carried in silence to the grave? The answer tells you everything about you that Poseidon already knows. He is not waiting for you to answer. He already knows what you will choose. You will build the city. You always build the city. And he will be there when the ground moves, as he has always been there, the way the abyss is always there, patient and dark and indifferent, beneath the thin, brilliant, fragile surface of everything you believe is permanent. The gods of the classical pantheon have mostly faded. Their temples are archaeology. Their worship is scholarship. But the Earthshaker left something behind that no era of rational science or engineering progress has been able to fully displace. It lives in the particular quality of the silence before a fault gives way. It lives in the retreating tide. It lives in the first vibration through the soles of your feet when you are standing somewhere you believed was solid and you feel, for one terrible, clarifying second, that it is not. We named that feeling after him for a reason, and we have not found a better name yet.